Hello everyone, welcome to the stream. Thanks for joining me today. Hope you're doing well. My name's Trent, and I see some of you guys are in the chat here. Breezer and Teak, thanks for joining me today. If you can, just let me know in the comments if you can actually hear this. Breezer, I saw your comment about getting ready, 5-minute jitters. I don't really have 5-minute jitters about being on stream. I have 5-minute jitters about things not working. I've had that experience a couple times. Whenever you start streaming, you click the start button, and there's kind of like this 10 to 15 second delay where you're just waiting for things to work. And I also made some changes to my streaming software recently, so I'm hoping nothing broke anything at all. But so far from my end here on my dashboard, it seems like things are working, so I'm going to assume they're working. Hello, Hector. One of the changes I made is I also increased the volume of my microphone a little bit. So I know some of my past streams, the volume was a little low. So I'm hoping that improves in this stream. So, all right, Breezer saying, sounds good. Teaker saying, sounds good. All right, that's good to know. And one other thing I'll mention right now is Breezer, you're here, which is cool. I recently released a video on making thumbnails in Canva. And Breezer asked me in the comments, could I review the thumbnails on his channel? So I did make a video on that. I'm still editing it. It'll probably be out tomorrow or Tuesday or something like that. Within the next couple of days, it'll be out. But this is something I'd like to do more of. If you guys have stuff you'd like me to review on stream and perhaps provide some design tips for things and techniques. In the video I release, I show some ways to use Affinity Photo to make thumbnails for your YouTube channel. But of course, the techniques are applicable to lots of things. And I'll have some more details on that in the video. So that should be coming out pretty soon. So Breezer, keep an eye out for that. Hi, Trong. Glad you're here. So yeah, this is my first stream back in about 2 weeks or so. I had just had some, random summer stuff to do on the Sundays. But today I thought I'd go over vectors. And this is primarily an Affinity designer thing, but these concepts kind of apply to everything. And I kind of just want to give an overview of, what vectors are, how they work. And I think sometimes people, when they're new to this software or other software in this area, Adobe Illustrator or Inkscape and things like that, they're kind of wondering like, okay, what can I do with vectors? What is the difference between them and other formats? So I thought that would be a good subject to just kind of review here. And some of you may have, some of it will probably be familiar to the more experienced users, but I think there may be a couple points that are interesting to know. So I thought I just have a little table of contents here. I do want to start going over the raster formats to begin with. And when I say raster, some people call these bitmap formats. These are your PNGs, your JPEGs, back in the old days, the GIFs, the BMP files. There's others, but JPEG and PNG are kind of the big ones. And then the main thing of the session today will be vectors, how they work, and kind of editing them and that type of thing. So yeah. So Hillary, if you that question, if you kind of save it to the end, I can answer that perhaps. I'd be happy to. I'm trying to stay on the main thing for the moment, but yeah, I'll definitely remind me at the end if I forget to answer your question. Okay. But as I talk about this, if you guys have vector questions, feel free to ask in the chat, and I'll try to answer them immediately. But for non-vector stuff, I'll answer it at the end. So that'll be the format today. So let's first just start with like PNG and JPEG, because I think when you look at these things, it makes you appreciate a little bit what vectors do. It's kind of hard to understand the benefits of vectors when you don't really know how they compare to the other image formats like PNGs and JPEGs. So these are, as I said, what some people call them raster, some people call them bitmap. It's, I think they're basically the same thing. I use both interchangeably, but when I'm talking about raster or bitmap, I'm essentially talking about PNGs and JPEGs. Hey, S. Austin, thanks for joining. So these two formats, undoubtedly you've used them a lot, and maybe you wonder, what is the difference between them? Typically, PNGs are going to be lossless compression, and JPEGs are what we call lossy compression. So lossless compression means we can compress a file, but we can actually keep all the data in it. And it doesn't actually compress as well as a lossy format, so that's what JPEG does. When you save an image as a JPEG, when you choose the compression level, it's going to throw out some of that data to improve file size. When I say improve, I mean make smaller. but it can actually, might harm the quality a little bit. The big difference between PNGs and JPEGs are really PNG support transparency, and I'll show you an example of that. JPEGs do not. And typically you'll see PNGs used for like sharp and precise graphics. You have a logo, you want to have a transparent background, probably it's going to be PNG. And JPEGs are really good for things like photos. So let me show you some examples here. Let me show you an example of a JPEG. I mean, you've seen JPEGs all your life, but I just want to show you something here. So here we have one, cat. And the thing about JPEGs and PNGs is that they're built from a grid of pixels, okay? So this image, the reason it looks like something is if you zoom in really far, what you'll see is that everything is made of these squares here. And these are pixels. And you can't subdivide them anymore. These are the smallest units of color you can have in your image. And I have this set so you can see the grid. You can hide it, so I can hide show pixel grid so it doesn't show the grid, but I think the grid's kind of useful to show how things go. So notice how every single one of these squares is just one color. You may think it's a gradient. It's kind of an optical illusion because sometimes you see the color blend into the one next to it. But these are what our images are made of, okay? And if I go to a PNG, let's open up a PNG. So this is a JPEG. It could be a PNG, but it's a JPEG. I mean, you could get the same effect. It would just be a bigger file. But let me open up a file that can only be a PNG. So this is a PNG here, PNG file. And if I zoom in, once again, you can see we have the pixels here. But the big difference is that the PNG support transparency. So this background, this black and white checker, that symbolizes transparency. So if I added another layer below it, I could fill it with green or something like that. And it's transparent. So that's what that's telling you there. If I save this image and I print it on a web page, if the background of my web page is blue, you would see blue behind this text, this image here. So that's the main difference between PNGs and JPEGs. Now, let me show you something here. A lot of times when we talk about these raster images, we have to consider the quality of the image, right? And the quality is usually going to be based on how many pixels there are width and height. So I forgot to turn on my zoom tool here. Zoom it. Yeah, there we go. So here, this is Affinity photo. It'll tell you like how big the image is. So this is 100 pixels by 100 pixels. So if I zoom in, you can see this is clearly pretty low quality. So I'll zoom in here. So we have these big blocky pixels that are just holding one color. It's not a lot of information there. Now, I said the pixels, the resolution is how much quality our image has. The higher resolution, the more quality. Well, what I can do with this is I can resize it, okay? So let me double the size here. So I'll do document, resize document, and I'll make it, let's say, twice as big. And I'll say resize. Now, the resolution is technically higher. It's 200 pixels by 200 pixels. But if I zoom into this image, I didn't actually increase the quality really, because you can see while I doubled the pixels, I still have just these blocks of color here. So essentially you can see these 2 by 2. These are, this is 4 pixels here. But even though it's more pixels, the quality didn't increase because all it did was just double the pixels that were already there. And this is kind of one of the things that confuses people, and that they'll have like a low quality image and they might think that by resizing it they can get better quality, but you really can't do that. You kind of have to consider where the origin of your image is from. So you can't just arbitrarily resize it and make it bigger, even though technically this is now the double the resolution. We didn't add any information there. Now there are some smarter ways to resize things. So if you go to resize document, there's some other algorithms here you can choose, but ultimately they're still just kind of they're just taking information that's from within the image already, so you're not really getting any new information. So it's not technically increasing the quality, but it's kind of just making it look a little bit different. There are some AI tools these days that can genuinely improve the quality of things as you resize them. And they kind of do that because they're trained on other data. So they're pulling in extra data knowledge to improve your image. But in general, for a raster image, you can't really just like resize it and improve the quality without using some AI tool. So this is going to be kind of a key difference as we talk to vectors. Hi, Dwight. Hi, AH. Trong, I'm leaving your comment. Using the drawing pen in Affinity still encounters some errors. Interesting. Yeah, perhaps you can let me know what errors it's encountering, like if it's crashing or something like that. That would definitely be something. And then also like maybe the Affinity forums, they might be able to help you on that too. Like if you can get a screen recording of those errors, that would definitely help them. So this is kind of a little crash course in raster images. Let's go back to our vector talk here. So now let's look at vectors. And I could have separated this a lot of ways. I'll just generally call this section vectors. Let's look at one example of a vector. So I'll open a vector file. And this is something I just downloaded online. And it's a vector. Now, the interesting thing about this is in a vector, I can zoom in forever. And we actually always have like perfect resolution. Notice I'm never getting that pixel grid of anything. I'm zoomed in, like up here you can see, I'm literally zoomed in 84,000%, and I still have just a razor sharp edge there. Okay, so I'll zoom out. You can look at the curve. You know, no matter where the curve is happening, it's always sharp there. Teaker saying your cat was freaking out about the cat on the screen. Yeah, yeah, my cats also freak out when they see a cat on the screen. They like that. So here we just have basic shapes, and that actually goes for the text too. It's just, these are just shapes here. One thing that I remember about vectors is a lot of times you'll see text in a vector, but it's not actually kind of what I would call like true text. It's just a shape that looks like a letter. So this is a B here, but there's no knowledge that this is actually the word baseball. Like you're not going to be able to change the letters unless you actually have graphics for those letters or something. But later on, I'll show you, how that works. So this is just the first example of many vectors we'll look at. So the key point here is there's no resolution. You can go in infinitely, and it's always going to maintain quality. And then later on, we'll look at why that actually happens. Like, why is this even possible? Because it seems impossible compared to what we just saw with the PNGs and JPEGs, but there's some reasoning why you can actually do this. So let me show you some formats here. Now you don't have to memorize all of these, but these are just some kind of things you'll probably see as you go about like working with vectors or downloading them. So text is actually a vector type. So if you've ever installed a font, TrueType, OTF, WAF, these are all they're a type of vector because you can take text, you can scale it infinitely with these new formats. And it's a type of vector that maybe you never thought of, but it is. In the middle, I have this category which I call proprietary. So these are basically formats that are created by a company. So a company creates these formats to support their program or their file format. So Affinity Designer uses this AF Design format. So if you save a Affinity Designer project, it'll be AF Design. Adobe has many they've created over the years. AI is the Adobe Illustrator format. EPS, some type of like PostScript format. It's also a vector type. And PDF has some vector properties. And then Autodesk has this DXF format, which sometimes you see. Sometimes if you do like those crafting programs like Cricut or whatever, they come with like DXF templates for their patterns and things like that. And then we have what I call the open formats. So this is SVG. So SVG is a standard. No company really owns it. I think it's the W3C that defines it. And it's something that, anyone, you can go online, you can read exactly how it works. Everyone knows how SVG, if you want to know, you can find the information online of how it works, like the settings and the shapes and all that kind of thing. But this is kind of the standard for the internet vector usage, SVG. So if you see Wikipedia uses SVGs a lot, you'll see them there when it's like a graphic like a data graphic or something like that. So these are the kind of things you'll see used. And let me give you an example of something here. So a lot of times, like if you download some type of vector online, so here's a site I talk about often, like Creative Fabrica. They have lots of graphics assets, okay? So if you find like some vector image you like, okay, maybe you like this butterfly. If you scroll down, a lot of times it will come in these multiple formats. So they'll give you the vector file here. So Adobe Illustrator, EPS, SVG, DXF. You're not ever really going to see an Affinity Designer format. You'll see SVG, which you can use. And then a lot of times what they've done is they've like rendered it to a JPEG or PNG too. So a lot of times when you download these things, you'll get all these formats. And I believe I downloaded it. Let me show you the example here. Yeah, so I downloaded this, I unzipped it. And these are the files that it gave me. So I can choose which one I want to use. Okay. So we'll talk more about this in a little bit too. But that's going to be a very common thing is, you know, you're not going to get exactly the format you want. Someone might send you these other file types and then you can bring them into Affinity Designer. So let's look about like how vectors work and why they kind of do what they do. So let me open up this other file here. So, and again, I'm in Affinity Designer here. I thought we'd start off by talking about three kind of main types of vectors you see, which are shapes, curves, and text. And these are probably the three most common ones you'll use in Affinity Designer. So when I talk about shapes, what I mean are kind of these smart shapes over here. So let me get it so it doesn't hover over. And actually this one here might be something different. Yeah. So these are what I would call shapes, okay? And let me draw a couple just so you can see something. I'll draw some of the more interesting ones like star here. Let's make it yellow. And let's do something else like something that has some properties to it. There's a gear one I like. Yeah, cog tool. Let's do this. I might need to hide your chat for a minute. Let me make this bigger so we can see. And let's see. So one menu bar isn't showing here. Show context toolbar. Yeah. All right, that's good. All right, I can still show your thing. Okay. So the thing about shapes, which are these things here, is they're kind of, you can call them smart shapes in a way. When you select one of them, what happens is Affinity Designer knows that they have certain properties. So it knows that a star has this concept of points, radius, outer circle up here. So for example, when I select a star, you can see I have these options over here, okay? So points, radius, that type of thing. So let me change that. So with it selected, I'll change this. I'll give it more points, okay? Now if I select the gear, these options change. A gear doesn't have points, it has teeth. So I can change the teeth of it, all right? I can change the inner radius of it. I can change the hole radius. Let's see what that does. It does that. I can change the tooth size. So there's all these different kind of properties of each one. So let's try one more. Let's try something looks different. Let's try the arrow tool, okay? So the arrow tool, I can draw an arrow. And an arrow has special properties that are unique to the arrow. So it has the thickness here. I can change that. I can change the beginning and end shape of it, I guess. I can make it like a circle or something. All sorts of things you can do. But the important thing is that each thing is what I would call a smart shape. It kind of, and I say smart in that it has these special properties that you can change. They're unique to that shape. Now a curve, on the other hand, is just kind of a generic shape we can make ourselves or that we import from somewhere. So I'll use the pen tool to do that. That's this tool here. This is the pen tool. And this is the one that Trong said he was having some trouble with. So if I select the pen tool, I can make an arbitrary curve here. I can fill it. And I can complete it like that, okay? We can make other shapes as we'd like. I'll give you some more detail on curves in a bit. But The thing about curves is, let me make another one. You can see like there's nothing actually special about them. When I select the curve, no matter what curve I select, I get the same options up here. It doesn't know that it's a star or anything like that. So for example, let me draw a curve that kind of looks like a star. This won't be the greatest star, but I'll draw this. I guess that's a star, right? That's my bad star. But like I said, it's not actually a star. I don't have any of these properties up here for like the points and the radius and things like that. Whereas this one, when I select it as a shape, I do have these abilities up here, okay? And finally, we have the text. So text would be the artistic text and the frame text tool. So I'll click text here. So I can just say text. And I can resize it and things like that. So notice, let me choose another word here. Let me choose something that has some type of curve in it. A, B, C. So notice how the C is curved. Once again, I can zoom in infinitely, and we're getting like infinite resolution here. There's never any jagged points where you're seeing like pixelation or anything like that. Now, the thing to keep in mind is that we can actually take shapes and we can convert them to curves. And one of the differences between shapes and curves is that with curves, if I select this node tool here, you have the black arrow and the white arrow up here. And the black arrow is just kind of for moving things around. It's called it is called the move tool, of course. The white node is more for actually controlling the points of it. So if I click the white node, notice how now I see the points that make up that curve, and I can drag them around, okay? And I can do other stuff with it. So that's the difference between the black one and the white one. So I'll go back to the black one. What I can do with this is if I click the node tool here, it just gives me some controls. It doesn't actually give me the same type of fine-grain controls I have over the curves. What I can do is I can take a shape and I can convert it to a curve, okay? So let me just delete some of these to get them out of the way. So I'm gonna hold Alt. I'll hold Alt and I'll click and I'll drag. So I've copied this star here. But what I can do is, right now it's not a curve. I can go to Layer, Convert to Curves. And now it's actually a curve. And the thing about the curve is if I click on it, notice how I don't have any of those special star properties anymore. But what I can do is I can click on the node tool here, this white tool here. And now I can actually move the points around any way I want. But so that's the plus side. The downside is, like I said, I lost that star ability. So Affinity Designer, now that it's a curve, it has no concept of points and any other properties that are for this shape. I can do the same thing for the gear here. So I'll hold Alt, I'll click and I'll drag. Let's get rid of this. Now over here, notice in my layer stack, this is the cog I just copied. It's called a cog, which is basically, it means it's like a shape. So you can see, this means it's a shape, and you also have the name there, okay? So what I'll do is with this selected, I'll go to Layer, Convert to Curves, and now you can see it's curves, okay? And it still looks exactly the same, but I've lost all those special abilities of the cog tool. And sometimes this is what you want to do because you have one of these shapes and maybe you want to modify it a bit. This comes in really handy when we talk about text. So we can do the same thing with text. We can convert it to a curve. So let me take my text here. You can see if I hover over it, it says artistic text here. So this is indicating that it's text, okay, what I have selected here. Let me, I'll delete this. Let me delete this. So I'll drag this over. And what I can do is I can say Layer, Convert to Curves. And now what happens is my letters are just curves now. So if I click on the node tool, I can actually, well, I know I can, but like maybe you want to modify your letter a little bit. Maybe you want to make it look a little bit different. You want to give it a little bit extra style or something. I don't think this is an improvement what I'm doing here, but like you could see how this could be useful if you want to customize text in a certain way. So maybe I wanted the A to be really extreme in that direction, okay? That could be a thing, like the A. I like that change there. Maybe I could move the top point. Something like that. So you can actually kind of like modify your text like this, okay? And that's because what I did with the text is I converted it to a curve. And you can see that over here now. So this was the original one. It's listed as artistic text. And then I copied it and then converted it to curve. And it created a group, and I guess it made each letter its own separate curve. The downside of this is that I can't change it anymore. Like over here, I can change this. I can say X, Y, Z. But over here, I've completely lost the ability to do anything like text-based with this. Affinity Designer doesn't know that this is text anymore. It's just a curved shape. So that's kind of the difference between that. So it's kind of a sacrifice you have to make when you go convert to curves. So that's kind of like the three main types I wanted to show you there. Now let me show you some other stuff you can do with the vectors. You saw that there were kind of, I could change the colors and also the strokes of them. So let me do that there. So with, so I have a star tool. Hi Sono from Sweden, thanks for joining. So when you have a vector, there's kind of two main color components to a vector, or I'd say two main components to a vector. There's the fill and then there's the stroke. And over here with this star selected, you can see the two settings over here for this thing. So the fill is this middle color here. So it's in the front. So I can change it here. I can change the color. Then if I want to change the stroke, I click the stroke outline in the back. Now that's in the front. And I can change the color of that there. Let me change it to something that shows up, maybe orange. And the stroke has lots of different things you can do to it. So if I have my vector selected here, I can actually go to the stroke tab and I can change the properties of the stroke. There's tons of stuff here. I won't go over all of it, but I'll just show you like a quick one, which is you can make it a dashed line if you like. So I can make this a dashed stroke there. And that's kind of like the main, stylistic thing you can do to a vector. Now you can also add a gradient into it. So let's choose some other shape here. I'll just do a rounded rectangle. So you can see it remembered the last style I had. Sometimes you don't like that. You just want to like go back to the beginning. What you can do is you can click this here. This revert to defaults. So with my new vector selected here, I'll click revert to defaults. And now it just goes back to this basic gray shape. But what I can do is I can use this gradient tool here. And I can add a gradient to it. And by default, it just kind of takes your current color and adds a darker color. But if I go back to my color tab, with my gradient selected here, I can click on either of the endpoints and I can change the color like so. So I want to give a deep dive on like every single tool here, but that's just kind of a basic overview of like what you can do with vectors to change their look a little bit. You can change the fill color, you can change the stroke, and you can give them a gradient if you like. And at the end, I'll kind of show you, like if you want more details on any of these tools, I have videos for all of them, so you can go into detail there. Now let me talk a little bit more just about curves here. And I kind of want to give an idea of like what they can and can't do. Let me show you some examples of using the pen tool here. And I'd say there's a couple kind of categories of curves. One would be like a closed curve. So let me turn off my snapping for one thing. Let's make a closed curve here. Let me make my stroke a little bit bigger. So you can see here, like what I'm going to do now is I'm going to click the first point I made and I'm going to make it closed. So that closes our curve here. So this is a completed curve. I'll make another one and I'll keep this one open. So for this one, for some reason it doesn't remember my fill. Okay. So this would be an open curve here because these points at the end, if I go to the node tool and I click on the curve, you can see there's no final line here, whereas on this one, you can see there's the line there, okay? Now, I can also have no stroke if I like, so I can do the pen tool here. I'll close it, I'll put the fill in, and I can like get rid of the stroke. So if I select the stroke, I can just get rid of it like that. Now, as you kind of work with more complex shapes and you move points around, you can kind of get crazy things happening. So let me show you some examples of that. Once again, it removed my, let's do this black, let's do this blue. So one thing is that as you drag points around, you'll start to see things like if you start to cross over like that, you can see things like that happen. And it's not wrong. I mean, it's not bad or anything, but sometimes it might not be what you want or what you expect. So it can be a little odd if you have your points kind of overlapping each other, or your kind of edges kind of overlapping each other like that. Now you may look at something like this and say, well, I guess it's just filling in the area between the points, but it's not exactly what it does. If I take this, if I drag it, let me add another point here. Let's see what I can do. It kind of like, yeah, you can see here. I'm just trying to show you that it's not technically filling in all the areas. Like you have this area here. So there's some type of algorithm where it determines like how many overlaps there are and whether or not the area in between will be filled. But generally speaking, you don't want to do this anyway, but I'm just kind of showing you what happens when you drag points around in a random manner. So these are kind of the basic things you can do. But one more thing you can do is you can create a hole in a vector that you want. So let me do that. Aubrey, glad you liked the stream. Thanks for your compliment. So I'll fill this in. And let me draw another shape. I'll just make this some other thing. What I can do is I can cut a hole out of a vector as well. So I'll select both of these. And what I'll do is, I'll talk more about these later, but I'm going to use the Boolean operation here. So I'm going to click subtract. So now I've made, this is actually one curve now. So if I select this, this is the one curve over here that I'm selecting. And you are allowed to put holes inside of vectors. And the way it works is if I have this selected here, if I click the node tool, you see it's just kind of like interior nodes that have their own shape here. And it's kind of identified as being like negative space or something like that. Once again, you can go crazy if you drag this out here. Not something you probably want to do, but it's possible. But you can move the hole in the middle of a vector around. So these are kind of the basic shapes you can have. Everything kind of builds from this, whatever vector you look at. Typically, it's going to be something like this, just with more points and some type of interesting shape, like a butterfly or something, or flowers. And then, you may also notice there are parts where there's holes in it like this to create some type of look there. We'll see that later. Now, one thing I want to kind of make clear, perhaps I'll put these together, is you're often going to want to have this situation where you're like, okay, when I look at all this, how do I get a situation like this? Maybe I want a point where 3 lines intersect or something. Like I want to make this pie chart, and I want to have a point where multiple things intersect. And the answer is you can't actually really do that. The way you get something like this to look like this is actually I have 4 different pie slices just up against each other. So if I click this red one, I can just pull it apart. That's really what it looks like. And same thing with this blue one here. So this is how you get something like this. So let me undo it. So whenever you're gonna have situations where maybe you want something like this, but really it's actually 2 separate shapes coming together. So you can't have one point that has 3 lines going into it. You can only have 2. And to make it more clear how that's working, what's happening here is I actually have like one point that's doing that, and I have one point that's doing that, but they're very close to each other. So it looks like it's just one point, but it's actually 2 points. And the same thing with this middle part here. It's not one node with 4 things going into it. It's actually, I guess, 4 nodes with 2 things going into it. So it's just these things together. So this is kind of an important point because, no pun intended, but like when you're using the pen tool, when you want to do something like this, you're like, how do I actually do that? And the answer is you don't really. You just kind of create shapes that are next to each other and that give the illusion of being this type of intersection. Okay. And oh yeah, one more thing I'll show you. While we're here, I guess it's mostly related to this part. You can actually join curves together. Okay, so I'll show you the tools for that. Let's put these down below. So if I have a closed shape, let's make it a different color. Let's make it orange. What I can actually do is with the node tool selected, we start to get these options up here for splitting and breaking the curve. So there's a lot of them, but I'll just show you two. So like right now I could select these two nodes here and I could basically, let's see, break the curve. So I click break curve. And what it does is it creates like a separate one, but you can just delete that. So I'll just delete that. So I broke the curve there at this point. Now another thing you can do is you can join curves together. Let me create another shape here. And let's fill it with this. Whoops. So let's say I want to join these two guys together. Well, what I can do now with both of them selected, I can select my node tool. And then I can select the 2 points that I want to be kind of stitched together. And that's going to be, let's see. Yeah, join curves. Yeah, that one there. So like that. And then I can select the other two and I can join those two there. Joyce, you're saying, so can we make a vector graphic? Yeah, you can make a vector graphic. So you would use, if you want to make it from scratch, you could use the pen tool like I did here. You could use the Boolean operations, which I'll show later. But what you'll have is, you know, typically what people do, the workflow a lot of people do is they sketch something by hand and then they trace it with the pen tool and they kind of use that as their kind of underlay layer to trace, and then they will make that as a vector there. So yeah, hopefully that answers your question. Let me open up another file here. So let me know if you want more details on that. I mean, creating a full-blown vector graphic, yes, like that's a big thing. Like I would say you would need like references and like how you want to, like what your target image is going to look like, making a sketch, tracing it, using the pen tool, and also using some of the Boolean operations we talk about later. Okay. So one thing I want to talk about a little bit is just like the difference between vector graphics and raster graphics again, just to kind of drive the point home a little bit. So let me draw a circle here. So Joy, you're saying, as a normal artist, how could you turn a piece of art into a vector so we could print at different sizes? Yeah, so like I said, one thing you could do is you could scan it in and trace it. Another thing you could do is use a vector conversion program. So there are some tools. Affinity doesn't have one of those yet, but if you search online, there are some tools that can actually take your art and convert it to a vector. And it's not going to be, you know, sometimes it's not 100% accurate. I do have a video on my channel about that. So I would say if you search on my channel for vector tools, you'll see some that are available. It's going to give varying levels of quality. There's a couple of good ones these days that use like AI to like take your images and convert it to vectors. And then you can, once it's in a vector file, you can export it at different sizes. And at the end of this video, I'll show you, at the end of the stream, I'll show you how you can export things to a different size. So yeah. Let me get rid of the stroke. So kind of like, I want to give you a little bit of an understanding of like why the magic happens with an SVG. Like why can it be scaled forever? So I have this image here and let me export it. So I'll do File, Export, and I'll export it as an SVG. Okay, so I'll click SVG and I'll click Export. Let's see where I want to put it. I'll just put it on my C drive. I'll call it Circle SVG. Save. Okay, let me open it. So, you know, I save this in SVG. If I open it here, it looks, you know, it opened in Microsoft Edge. But what these SVG files are actually just text files. So if I open it, let me open it in a text editor here. Now, you don't need to understand exactly what this does, but I just kind of want to give you a appreciation for how it actually works. So there's some like code here, but The important thing to understand is just like if you look at this line here, it says circle. And then it has these parameters that are the center points for our circle and the radius. And it also says the color over here. So this is the RGB color. So this is our cyan, our greenish and blue color here. And really this is the reason it can scale infinitely is a program like Microsoft Edge or Chrome or whatever. It knows how to read this file and it knows what a circle is in the sense that it can draw it perfectly. So no matter what your scale is, if you want to double the size of your circle, you can just multiply these things by 2 and it still knows how to draw a circle perfectly, okay? Let's try it for a rectangle. So if I put this circle here, let's do a rectangle. Let's change the color. Let's make it like pure red. So I'll do File, Export, SVG. Let's call it circle and rectangle. I'll open this one up in a text editor. So here you can see this is the rectangle we just added. Okay, so it just gives it an X and Y position, a width, a height, and it filled it with red. So it's very easy for any program that understands vectors to just draw this. And if you want to make the rectangle bigger, like you zoom in 20 times, it just multiplies this number by 20. And let me give you just one final thing, because probably the final thing is like the curves. So like how does arbitrary shapes look? So I'll put this here. Let's create a curve with the pen tool. Give some random color. Let's give it a stroke too. So let's do that. Let's call it shapes. So on this one's a little harder to see, but what it's doing for that is the path parameter here. So let's zoom in. So this is the random thing I just created. So what it does is that's called a path, essentially. So before we had the rectangle, we had the circle. The last thing I created was this path, and it just gave it a series of points, you know. But you can also see there's the stroke here, so I gave it a black stroke, and the stroke width. So all this stuff really just gets saved in there, and it's really easy for programs to scale it up, okay? And that's kind of the magic of vectors. That's why they can zoom in infinitely, because the programs that render them know how to draw these things, and they know they can just multiply the math to make them look better at bigger sizes, okay? So certainly let me know if you have any questions so far. I know it might be a lot of information. So now we can look at basic vector editing. I showed you a little bit already with the pen tool, but we can look at it a little bit more. And I emphasize basic because I don't want to go over every single Affinity Designer tool, but I want to show you a couple things I think would be useful. And kind of, I think the main use case for a lot of people, at least for me, is kind of working with third-party graphics that you downloaded. So let me show you an example here. So once again, I downloaded this example file. So this is a vector I found on Creative Fabrica. It's kind of like this little mushroom composition here. And I downloaded it as these files here. So let me show you how I would actually kind of like work with this and edit it. All right. So let's see. So I downloaded it here, and it was this zip file. So I unzipped it here. And what you get is these are the files that are included here. And if you remember the beginning of the class, kind of this is where I talked about these file types here. So it gave me a JPEG version, PNG version. Let me open up the SVG and the EPS version. So I'll open them both. Don't want to save that. Sure. Let me just do some housekeeping here. Close some things. So this is the SVG file. Let me open up the EPS file. Close that. The EPS one, it automatically opens in Affinity, but I'll choose it anyway. So yeah, so Typically the SVG file and the EPS file, they're probably going to look pretty similar. You may find that one has like a white background or something, but these are basically the same thing. Now, if you're going to work with an SVG file, what I recommend is taking the SVG file and putting it in its own Affinity Designer file. So I'm just going to select this whole thing. I'll copy it, and I'll just do File, New. And I'll create an Affinity Designer file. You can basically create it any size. Like I said, if it's just vector, it's not terribly important, as long as you're not going to be like bringing in raster images, which you can do, but I'll just paste this here. And I'll resize it like this. So this is our vector we downloaded from online. Let me get some stuff here. Now, let me save it too, just so I don't lose it. Yeah, I'll save it here. Now, one thing I often find when I download vectors like this and I work with them is when you select it, what you'll notice is that the color actually isn't truly black. A lot of times it looks black, but I think it's like some slightly not version of black that adheres more to like CMYK standards or something like that. So if I select a shape here, like a random shape, if I click this button here, I can see it's actually not truly black. For truly black, these would all be 0. So if you want something to be truly black, what I recommend is select the whole thing and then just like hard, shift into the corner there to give it true black. So now if I hover over it, it's actually fully black there, 0, 0, 0, okay? What you'll also notice too sometimes is like the way strokes are used can be kind of inconsistent. So let's look at this moon here. I'll select the black. Let me change the color to red. So yeah, I can see like there's a stroke here on the moon, okay? So maybe you can get rid of it if you want. Maybe you can leave it there. But you will find like some people have strokes on their vectors and some people don't. So I guess what I'll do again is I'll just select the whole thing. I'll select the strokes here and I'll just make the strokes black. So that's something to keep in mind. And kind of what I want to show you is the way people structure their vectors. That's kind of the point of why I'm showing you this thing, like how to work with these things. Something else that's I think interesting is when you look at a shape like this, let me drag it out over here. I just Alt and I just click and drag to make a copy of something. There's a lot of different ways you can make something like this. And typically when you see anything in these types of graphics, even if it's like a fine line or something like this, it's going to be a shape like we saw before where it's not actually a stroke. Let me show you another way you could make this type of thing to kind of show you what I'm exactly talking about. So I could do something like this. I could go to the stroke. I could make it like that. I could make it... the points I could make round. Okay. So this is what this is. It's a line with just a stroke and no fill. That's not how this is structured. This is actually structured much differently. You can see this is just a shape with a hole in it. Okay. Now this may seem like a kind of a subtle difference, but it's kind of important in understanding like how you want to change things. Like if I want to change this, I go to the color and I change the stroke, right? But if I go to this, if I go to the stroke and I change the stroke, that's the stroke there, okay? So this thing here is much more like what I showed you earlier, where if you have like some type of shape, it's much more like they did this. And let's make the points round. So it's kind of like they had something like this. Whoops. And then perhaps they had another thing and they cut it out of it. So that's kind of how they get that, all right? So hopefully this will just give you a little bit more kind of insight into how to deal with these types of things. So let me know if that doesn't make sense. But again, it's the difference between this type of thing where you have like a stroke as opposed to this where you have a shape with a hole in it, okay? So the reason that's important is sometimes you'll be trying to change the stroke when something really isn't a stroke, okay? So again, on this, the outside of the mushroom, it looks like it could be just a stroke with like the pen or something, but it's actually not. It's these different points here that are making it, okay? One thing I do want to show you is the knife tool, and that's a basic thing for manipulating other people's images. So let's say you want to cut off part of this leaf here. Like maybe you like this leaf, maybe you just like this top part and you want that there. What you can use is the knife tool, and that's this here. Knife tool. So with this selected, what I'll do is I'll click the knife tool there, and I can just like slash it in there. So it's actually as simple as it sounds. You just like select your thing, kind of drag through it. So now I can drag this out, and I can have my separate thing here if I want. So maybe I want to use this in something else. Something I often do is sometimes I'll see something like this, and maybe I just want to use like a flower or something. So I'll like cut off a flower, and I'll just use that somewhere else. So let me show you again how we did that. So if I have the moon, I could take the knife tool, and I could cut off part of the moon there. Now, one thing to remember is that point I said earlier about a node cannot have 3 things intersecting it. So if I select this, let me select the knife tool again. Now if I do something like this, and I let go, what have I actually done there? It kind of looks like it's violating that rule, because we can't have 3 points going in and out. But what I've actually done is it's actually 2 nodes here. So I can drag one this way and the other that way, okay? And the same thing here. That's basically, and this is here is just 1 point where it's going in and out, all right? So once again, we can't violate our rule of, having 3 points, having 3 lines going to a single node. So if I do this, what happened really, you can't see it, but this is actually sliced into 2 parts now, okay? So that's something useful to remember. Undo that. And by the way, here's an example of you may want to modify the part of this shape here. So like, how could we do that? Well, if I select this, if I select the node tool, I can see like, why is that bent like that? Well, if I select this here, there are these handles that control the way the lines go in and out of our points. So I can take this, I can drag it like that, and I can fix it if I like. So that's a way you can modify your graphics there. Okay. So the main way you can modify these tools is with the knife tool and using the node tool to kind of click on something and change the shapes as you like. So maybe I don't like how high this is. With the node tool here selected, I can click on this point here, and I can drag it down. Maybe I want to modify it a bit. I'll click on this bottom one. I'll drag it up. It kind of has that strange effect there. Maybe that's cool. I don't know. It's kind of interesting. So you can modify things that way. Now there's also the pen tool, and I don't want to go into like a huge thing on the pen tool because it's kind of painful to go over, but basically this is the thing you would use to make your own shapes from scratch, or modify existing shapes. And I kind of showed you to you on that other one earlier when we were doing the curves demo. So one other thing I want to show you in this section, I want to show you how Booleans work, and I showed you a little bit of that earlier. This is another way you can build up shapes from simpler things. So the Booleans, let me make this size. The Boolean options are going to be the ones up here. Let me select 2 shapes here. So I made these 2 shapes. Drag them over here. This is a basic vector operation also. So it's these blue boxes up here are the Boolean operations. And what they're going to do is they're going to let us combine or subtract shapes in a certain way. Okay. So the way it works is if you select both of these shapes, these options become available. Let me show you what add does. So let me make it so they're not. Let me make it so they're together in the layer stack here. Let's move this up. All right. So I'm selecting both of these here. So it's 2 different shapes. Literally they're shapes. One's a rectangle and ellipse. If I click add, they're now joined together. And now it's actually a curve. So this is the curve now. Let me redo that again in case you missed it. So Control Z. So with both of these selected, I'll click add. And now it's combined them into one curve. So if I click the point node tool here, you can see these are the nodes for this new combined curve. And they're not circles and rectangles anymore. It's just a new thing. So let's go subtract. Copy these. So let me do subtract twice. Let me do subtract. Let me bring this circle to the front. It's going to behave differently depending on which one's in front. So with this subtract, if I click subtract here, so this subtract up here, it cut out the rectangle from the circle below it, okay? This other one, let's do this, subtract. it cut out the circle from the square. So what subtract is going to do is going to depend on which one's in front. And it's going to basically, like literally what it did, just erase that shape out of the one behind it, okay? So in the order matters, whereas with add, the order doesn't really matter, okay? Let's look at intersect. So maybe you can guess what intersect does. The pictures are pretty clear, I think. They do a pretty good job of explaining it. So I'll click intersect. And it just gives me that common area of overlap there, okay? So that's what intersect does. Let's look at divide. I guess the next one's, well, I'll go with divide. Divide's the last one, but I'll do XOR after. So divide's kind of interesting. What divide will do, I'll click and I'll just show you. Now when I clicked on it, it didn't look like it did anything, but what it actually did is it kind of separated the shapes based on how they overlap, okay? So divide is going to look at the boundaries of where it overlaps, and it's going to cut through in that sense. Let me do another example here. Let's do a cog tool, sure. This one might be really complicated. Maybe not. Let's see how it looks. So let's see what happens if I divide these. So I'll click divide. And again, it looks like nothing happens, but in reality, I can pull these things apart like so. Okay, so divide can be really good sometimes when you want to cut something out of something else, or you want to kind of take the shapes and split them up based on their boundaries. So that's one I use quite a bit. And then XOR is a little confusing, but not much. XOR is just going to take the areas that don't have a common overlap. So XOR is this one here. So if I click XOR, it removes the area of common overlap. And it's a little more complicated than that, but at a high level, you can think of that's what it's doing. It's just taking the common area and deleting it out. It gets a little more complicated when you have like multiple things selected, but that's essentially what it does. And I should say you can have multiple things selected for these. So these are another way to kind of build up vector shapes. You can use the pen tool, but if you want to build something from these primitive shapes, Booleans are a pretty common thing. The one I use the most is probably subtract to like cut a hole out of something. That's the one I probably use the most. So that's the one I get the most value out of. And probably add too, but that's how those work. So let me know if you have any questions on that. Hi Sandra, reading your comment. Yeah, thanks for joining. Definitely, yeah, the live stream will be, it's saved like the second the live stream's over, so you can always view it in the future. And yeah, so it's always going to be there. Thanks for checking in. Oh yeah, one thing I want to mention is the images. Okay, so let's talk about images a little bit, because you can mix vectors and images. And that's done quite a bit, actually. Here's another cat. So Teak, maybe your cat's gonna freak out again. There are many ways you can combine like images and vectors into one composition. You know, I do it a lot, like bitmap, like raster art combined with like vector frames or something like that. So I thought this would be an example of something I could do with that. And the thing you want to remember is when your image, of course, will still have a resolution when you export it. So even though you're a vector, you can, if you export your image and you zoom in like 20,000 times, the vector part will look good, but your image part is still going to look, you know, it's going to have the pixels that you see. A tool I don't want to go into too much, but I'll just show briefly, is the Pathfinder tool, or the Shape Builder tool, I'm sorry, that's what it's called. And what you can do here is you can actually kind of fill in areas of your vector here. So you can see this vector here. The white is the background and the black is the vector part. But I can actually click this Shape Builder here. And I can actually like fill in areas. So you see this little gap here? Maybe I want that to be red. Whoops. So I can like actually fill in these little areas for the shape. And they add in additional curves here. So let's make this red. Make that one red. And they take like I said, the gaps as you can fill in here, and the icon kind of shows you what it's doing. So like I said, I don't want to go into it too much, this tool, but the main thing I wanted to show you, the main reason I wanted to do it is because I wanted to fill in this middle area. So I'm going to fill in the middle area with the shape builder. I'm going to click here. I'm going to make it red, but it's going to change anyway. This is the middle area. Now, one thing you can do that's kind of cool is you can put an image inside a vector. So I'm going to take this image here. I'm going to put it like this. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag it over the curve here, and this is going to clip into it. So I'm going to let go, and now it's inside this shape here, okay? So let me do that again. What I did is I took my image, I dragged it over the curve, over the word curve, I let go, and now my image is actually inside that shape. Now, one thing you want to make sure you don't do is don't drag over the image itself. That's a different thing, which is, it's valid, but it's probably not what you want to do right now. So I'll take the image and I'll drag it over here. And what I can do is I can actually get rid of that red color. Did I get rid of the red color? No. Okay. So this is one way you can like combine these things. Maybe I'll give it like a blue frame, make it a little nicer. So let me export. Whoops. Let me export this. I can export this as an SVG. I'll do that. So let me document setup. Let me make the background transparent also. So I'll do document color transparent. So I'll do file, export, SVG, export. So I'll say cat. So this is this is exporting as an SVG. And as we do with our SVGs, we can open it. And let's say I'll open it in Microsoft Edge. So this is a vector file. Now if I zoom in forever, how do I? What you can see is like the vector part is going to stay infinite resolution, right? But our pixel part is going to be limited, okay? Can I zoom in more? I guess 500% is the most I can do. But yeah, so the vector part is still very sharp, but you know, as we scroll around, the cat is going to lose resolution. I'm still not zoomed in enough, but you can start to see the pixels here. Whereas with the vector, it's still pretty sharp, okay? So you can mix and match these things together, but you just need to be careful of the raster part. If you put it inside an SVG, it's going to have a resolution. And let me just show you what that looks like here. So you can see the cat SVG. You can see it's so big compared to the other vectors because it has that image in it. So Hillary, reading your comment. So you have an image of leather. You want to turn shapes and text with the leather texture. I think that's what I am doing. Yes, so I'll show that here. So let me find something like leather texture. I found a quick texture here. So let's see here. Let's just make it, yeah, I don't know, something like this. So this is like a leather texture. And that's basically what I was doing is, let's say I have some text here. My text. This works with text and it also works with shapes. So let me give it something like chunky there, okay? So I can take the leather, and you don't have to put it over to begin with, but I do it just so you can kind of see where it's going. And then you click the image and you drag it over there, and then you let go. So this is now, you know, the vector letters are now containing that bitmap image, okay? So that's how you would do that. So let me do it again just really slowly. So you would take your image and drag it over your text, the name of it, and then that's how you could add some type of texture to your text if you want. So yeah, that's how you could do that. So yeah, so I just wanted to show this briefly to show that, you know, vectors and images can be used together. Just got to keep in mind that the image is still going to be limited by its resolution, even if the vector part is not. So yeah, I'll just want to give a brief chat about like the workflow and how things go. And this was talked about a little bit earlier. or the question came up, and a thing I see a lot is people saying like, well, okay, I have an Affinity Designer file. Like, what do I do with it? Like, no one, knows how to read those files and stuff. And that's true. So what the Affinity Designer files are, those are kind of your working files. Those are the things where you do your work in, of course. Like, you edit the vectors, you bring in your images, you save it, you do all this kind of stuff. Then when you want to actually give it to someone, you export it. And you can export it as a PNG or a JPEG or an SVG if you like. Not as many people know how to use SVGs, but it's possible. You can do that. And that's kind of how the flow goes. Glad it was useful, Hillary. Great. And so this is kind of the workflow. Like, you edit in Affinity Designer or whatever vector program you're using, and then most normal people, they use PNGs and JPEGs. So you're going to export to that format there. So let me show you an example of that there. Okay, so I have this file, and it's an Affinity Designer file. So it's a cactus. It's pretty cool. And again, like, I can zoom in, infinite resolution. I guess there's a little bit of a glitch there. So I could take this, I could drag it, I could like fix it. Yeah. So you can do things like that when you see errors. So again, like, I just wanted to show you this has infinite resolution, even if it doesn't. I guess a little bit of jagginess here because this person didn't like import it correctly, but it happens. See ya, Teak. Thanks for joining. So this is an Affinity Designer file. If I want to give this to someone, what I do is I export it as some type of easier format, like a PNG or JPEG. So I'll go to File, I'll click Export, and then I can choose the format I want to send it to them in. So I can choose PNG. And what's interesting here is you can change the resolution. So I can make this anything and it will maintain its quality. So I'll keep this the default right now, 3000 by 2400. I'll say Export. And I'll just call this Cactus PNG. So I'll say Save. And then what I would do is I would, this Cactus PNG, if I open an Affinity photo. So now this is the file I just exported. Now if I zoom in, you're going to see there's a resolution to it because I exported it as a PNG. It's not a vector anymore, okay? So that's what you have to keep in mind. Now the power of this is that you can control what the resolution you want to export is. So I can do File, Export. I can make this like ×3. I can make this 9000 by 7200 pixels, okay? And I can export it. I can call this high res. And again, this isn't magic. This is just the computer knowing how to do math and multiplying all those points to give me a higher resolution. And so the higher res one, let's open that up. So I can zoom in. And there's still pixels, but it's actually like it's a little higher resolution than the other one. So let me zoom into the circle there. You can see the circle looks a little bit better than it does on the other one. So this is kind of how it looks on that one. And that's how it looks there. So that's the basics of the workflow. And I know there's the question earlier about that, about how do you export your work and things like that. Now there's something, I have a longer video on it of the export persona. I'll just click on it here. There's many like settings you can do for exporting. You can export a file into JPEG, into different sizes, different file names. There's all sorts of like clever stuff. Any kind of clever, complicated exporting thing you have, like maybe you want to export this SVG as like 5 different files of different sizes. You can do that in Export Persona. I would recommend checking out my longer video on that. I don't want to bog you down too much with that right now, but that's an option. For your basic day-to-day stuff, you can just stay in the normal Persona and just do File, Export, and then you just want to choose your file type and the resolution there. No problem, IH. So that was basically the crash course in vectors. I know it was a lot, but I tried to kind of give an overview of kind of the logic of how they work and what they do and why we use them. I'm hoping it's a little more clear now. I think there's that question of how do you take your art and translate it to vectors. I think I should probably make a fuller video on that because I didn't fully show that here, but that's definitely a good question of how to take your art and make vectors of it. Like I said, you can trace it or you can use an automated program to do it these days. If you're still kind of new to Affinity Designer, I have a 2-hour class on it, which kind of goes into some of these things in more detail. And also I have the playlist on my channel, which has, for almost all of the tools, I have a video on it so far. So I'll stay on for another couple minutes if you guys have comments on anything. Like I said, it was a lot of information, but hopefully it gave you some value there. I think with vectors, a lot of people use them for like their print on demand designs. They're good for like logos and things of that nature there. PISC6, thanks for the compliment. No problem. And they do have their uses. Like I said, a lot of times I mix them together a lot with raster images if I'm going to do like certain designs and things like that. And text is a form of vector too, so don't forget that. That's a powerful feature of there. The convert to curves feature is often used a lot to kind of make the text look a little more customized. Hector, thanks. Thanks, Hillary. Adrow's Poet, am I taking any suggestions? Yeah, I'm always taking suggestions. I mean, I'm always open to hearing things. I have a list, so it'll go on there. Certainly feel free to suggest anything that you'd like to see. And I'll try to add it to the list and put it in the queue there. In terms of upcoming videos, I have one on DPI for Affinity Photo and Affinity products, because I think DPI is something that a lot of people are confused with. Thanks, Joy and Muriel and Breezer. So I should be having that video out soon. And like I said, don't check out my thumbnail review coming up if you want to have any of your content reviewed. And I don't just like bash it or anything. I try to give you guys constructive feedback, and also kind of show you actually the way to use some tools to actually get some different effects and things like that. So that thumbnail video will be coming out soon. So thanks, PISC6, for the reminder of clicking the like button. It helps. So I think that's all I got for today. I'm not seeing any more questions, but yeah, enjoy the rest of your weekend, and I'll see you next week. Have a good one.